In February 1959, the world was a different place. The Cold War cast a long shadow. The space race was just beginning. A small group of young adventurers sought the quiet challenge of nature. They planned an expedition into the vast, snowy Ural Mountains in Russia. Black and white photo, the 9 smiling hikers, led by Igor Dyatlov. They packed their gear, they packed their hopes. They were students, they were graduates, full of life and versed in winter trekking. They knew the risks, they understood the mountains. They could not have prepared for what awaited them. They walked into the frozen expanse. They never walked out. Otter 10 was their destination. The journey tested skill and endurance. A Class 3 expedition, the highest difficulty then. It was a familiar challenge for them, not novices taking foolish risks. Seasoned explorers with deep respect for the mountains. They documented preparations in journals. They documented it in photographs, smiling faces, camaraderie, a shared passion for the wild, images frozen just before everything went wrong. Their confident trek became one of history's chilling mysteries. The plan was simple. Hike for about 2 weeks. Summit Otorten. Send a telegram from a nearby village. The expected return date passed. No telegram, only silence. At first, delays weren't alarming. Minor setbacks and a few extra days were common. Days turned into a week. Quiet dread grew. A search party was assembled. They embarked on a desperate mission. They did not find a typical lost expedition. They found a scene of baffling terror. The mountain's silence was broken by one discovery. The group's tent was found. It was abandoned and bizarrely damaged. The tent had been sliced open, not from outside. The cuts came from within. Belongings scattered, warm coats left behind, boots left behind, supplies left behind. They had fled in panic, partially clothed into -30°C night. The scene raised more questions than answers. Why would 9 experienced hikers abandon survival? What could have terrified them so they cut their way out of their own tent? On February 26, 1959, after days of grueling searching through the vast, unforgiving wilderness of the northern Urals, the first breakthrough came. As the search area expanded, the bodies were found one by one, scattered across the desolate slope of Kholat Syakhl, a place whose name in the local Mansi language means dead mountain. The scene that unfolded would only deepen the mystery, presenting the investigators with a series of baffling and disturbing discoveries. The location of each hiker told a fragmented story of their final, desperate moments. The first 2 bodies, those of Yuri Krivonyshenko and Yuri Doroshenko, were found near the remnants of a small, hastily built fire under a large, solitary cedar tree. The evidence suggested the fire had been feeble and short-lived, a desperate attempt to fight off the crushing cold, which was estimated to be as low as -30°C. The lower branches of the cedar tree were broken up to a height of 5 meters, indicating that someone had frantically tried to climb it, perhaps to get a better view of the camp, or to escape a threat on the ground. This makeshift outpost was more than a kilometer from the relative safety of their camp, a staggering distance to cover in such conditions. In a discovery that defied all logic, both men were barefoot and dressed only in their underwear. Their hands were abraded and raw, consistent with attempts to gather wood or climb the rough bark of the cedar. The official cause of death was hypothermia, but the circumstances raised an immediate chilling question. Why would experienced hikers abandon their tent and all their warm clothing to die of exposure in the middle of the Siberian night? The next 3 bodies were found further up the slope, at intervals between the cedar tree and the camp. They were Igor Dyatlov, the group's leader, Zenaida Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin. Their positions suggested they were seemingly trying to make their way back to the abandoned tent. Dyatlov was found 300 meters from the cedar, lying on his back, one hand clutching a birch branch. Kolmogorova was found furthest up the slope, nearly halfway back to the tent, her body showing signs of a final, desperate crawl. Slobodin lay between them, his face buried in the snow. While also succumbing to hypothermia, his autopsy later revealed a small 1.5 centimeter fracture in his skull, the first sign of the severe physical trauma that would characterize the final discoveries. The search for the remaining 4 hikers dragged on for 2 more agonizing months. It wasn't until the spring thaw began in May that their bodies were finally located. The final group wasn't discovered until months later, found in a den they had apparently dug for shelter, buried under 4 meters of snow in a ravine about 75 meters from the cedar tree. If the first 5 deaths were puzzling, these last 4 were horrifying. Their injuries were even more perplexing. Nicolas Thibault Brignolel and Semyon Zolotaryov had suffered massive internal trauma. Medical examiners documented numerous fractured ribs on both sides of their chests. Lyudmila Dubinina had similar devastating chest injuries. Alexander Kolovatov was found with them, dead from hypothermia, but without the same level of violent trauma. The force required to inflict such damage was compared by the lead investigator to that of a high-speed car crash. Yet inexplicably, their bodies showed almost no external wounds. There were no significant cuts, bruises, or soft tissue damage corresponding to the immense internal injuries, as if they had been crushed by an immense invisible pressure. To understand what might have happened, we must go back to the beginning. This essay will reconstruct the final days of the Dyatlov expedition. We'll walk step by step through their journey, from their optimistic departure to their final fateful campsite. We will rely solely on the evidence they left behind in their diaries and in the haunting images captured by their cameras. We'll follow their path through the snow-covered forests of the taiga, tracing their route as they moved further from civilization, and we will climb with them up the barren slopes of Kholat Shakal, Dead Mountain, to the exposed ridge where their final camp was made. Our goal is to piece together a clear, factual timeline from their cheerful departure documented in photographs to the terrifying, unknown events of the night everything ended. To do this, we'll examine the facts as uncovered by the 1959 Soviet investigators. We will present the evidence exactly as they found it, without the layer of speculation and myth that has accumulated over the decades. This is a story built from primary documents, autopsy reports, and the hikers' own words. The evidence presents a cascade of contradictions. Why did the hikers flee their only shelter in such a state of undress, into a blizzard? What could have caused the catastrophic yet strangely clean internal injuries? The case grew even more bizarre when it was discovered that one victim, Lyudmila Dubinina, was missing her tongue, eyes, and parts of her face. Furthermore, forensic tests detected low levels of radioactive contamination on some of the clothing recovered from the ravine. These are not fictional details added for dramatic effect. They are documented facts from the official 1959 case file, facts that led the lead prosecutor to close the investigation with a famously cryptic conclusion that the hikers died as a result of a compelling natural force which they were unable to overcome. The heart of any expedition is its people. For this fateful journey, the group was a close-knit circle of friends and peers, mostly students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, or UPI. They were young, brilliant, and bonded by a shared passion for the wilderness. The leader, 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, was a gifted radio engineering student and an experienced, meticulous planner. He was known for his quiet confidence and his ability to inspire trust in his team. This expedition was to be his most ambitious yet, a Category 3 trek, the highest difficulty rating in the Soviet system, that would earn them the prestigious title of Master of Sport. Zenaida Kolmogorova, 22, was another seasoned hiker, known for her boundless energy and cheerful disposition. Her diary entries often captured the group's spirit. Lyudmila Dubinina, just 20, was a tough and resilient economics student. Her fortitude was legendary. On a previous trip, she had survived being accidentally shot in the leg by a hunter, yet calmly instructed her friends on how to administer first aid. She was the group's treasurer, carefully tracking their shared expenses. The team was rounded out by a cadre of capable young men. Rustem Slobodin, a 23-year-old engineer, was the group's strongest athlete. Yuri Doroshenko, 21, was known for his easygoing nature. Yuri Krivonyshenko, 23, was an engineer at the secretive Chelyabinsk 40 nuclear facility and the group's resident musician, often lifting spirits with his mandolin. Alexander Kolovatov, 24, was a student of nuclear physics at a classified institute in Moscow, a detail that would later fuel intense speculation. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, 23, was a civil engineering graduate of French descent, celebrated for his sharp wit and sense of humor. And then there was Semyon Alexander Zolotaryov. At 38, he was the oldest and most mysterious member. A combat veteran of World War II, decorated for bravery, he was not a UPI student. He was a last-minute addition, a hiking instructor who had asked to join the expedition to earn his own Master of Sport certification. His presence, and the unusual tattoos found on his body, would become a central puzzle in the investigation. The 10th member, Yuri Yudin, was a 21-year-old geology student. Plagued by chronic sciatica and rheumatism, he was forced to turn back early in the journey, a decision that would ultimately save his life. Winter in the northern Ural Mountains is not a force to be taken lightly. It is a realm of profound silence and brutal, unforgiving power. Temperatures in February regularly plummeted to -30 degrees Celsius or -22 degrees Fahrenheit. With the addition of katabatic winds, dense cold air hurtling down the mountain slopes at high speeds, the effective temperature could drop to a life-threatening -50 degrees Celsius or -58 Fahrenheit. Their equipment, though rudimentary by today's standards, was the best available in the Soviet Union at the time. They relied on heavy wooden skis, felt boots called valenki, wool clothing, and quilted jackets. Their shelter was a single large canvas tent, custom designed by Dyatlov himself, which the entire group would share. It was durable, but offered minimal insulation against the extreme cold. Igor Dyatlov's meticulous planning is evident in the expedition's documents. He carefully mapped their route, a challenging 300-kilometer loop that would culminate in an ascent of Mount Otterten. He calculated their food supplies down to the last gram: crackers, condensed milk, sausage, and lard, high-energy rations for a high-stakes journey. The expedition officially began on January 23, 1959, as the 10 hikers boarded an overnight train from Sverdlovsk. Their diaries describe a jovial atmosphere filled with songs, jokes, and the excited anticipation of the adventure ahead. After the train, they took a truck to Vizhai, the last inhabited settlement on their route. It was a small logging village, an outpost on the edge of an immense, untamed wilderness. Here, they spent a night, enjoying the warmth of a stove and the company of locals before plunging into the wild. On January 26th, the group traveled by horse-drawn sleigh to a remote geological camp known as Sector 41. It was here that the 10th member, Yuri Yudin, suffering from a severe flare-up of his chronic joint pain, made the difficult decision to turn back. He collected some rock samples for his university and said his goodbyes, watching his friends ski away. He was the last person to see the 9 hikers alive and well. The following day, January 27th, the 9 began their trek in earnest. The group's shared diary notes the mood. The weather is good, it's warm. We are walking along the Lazva River. They were now truly alone, following the frozen river into the vast, silent taiga, the dense boreal forest that blankets much of Siberia. By January 31st, after several days of skiing through the forest, they left the sheltered lowlands and reached the base of the highlands at the edge of the tree line. They were now entering the most exposed and dangerous phase of their journey. Here, they constructed a storage platform known as a labaz. This elevated cache was a standard practice for such expeditions. Inside, they carefully stored surplus food and heavy equipment, about 60 kilograms worth, which they planned to collect on their return journey from Mount Otorten. The existence of the Labaz is a critical piece of evidence. It shows they clearly and unequivocally intended to come back this way. On February 1st, the group left the relative safety of the forest and began the ascent onto the slopes of Kholat Syakhl, which in the local Mansi language means dead mountain. Their plan was to cross the pass and make camp on the opposite side, but they were fighting against deteriorating conditions. The weather, manageable until now, began to worsen significantly. A diary entry from that day reads, "The wind is western, warm, piercing. I can't even think about setting up the Labaz." They were losing visibility and falling behind schedule. Around 5 p.m., likely disoriented by the poor visibility and powerful winds, the hikers stopped and pitched their tent on the open, exposed eastern slope of the mountain. This decision has been scrutinized for decades. Why camp here, in a place with no natural protection, instead of retreating 1.5 kilometers back down to the safety of the forest? Whatever the reason, exhaustion, a simple navigational error, or a desire to practice camping in harsh conditions, this was the last coherent action the group would take. Inside the tent, they prepared for what should have been just another cold night on the mountain, but something went terribly wrong. For 3 long months, the fate of the final 4 hikers remained a tormenting mystery. As winter's grip loosened and the deep snows of the Ural Mountains began to melt, the search intensified. The focus shifted to a deep, wooded ravine not far from the cedar tree where the first bodies had been found. The conditions were treacherous, with melting snow creating unstable ledges and streams of icy water. It was not until May 4th, under 4 meters of dense, wet snow, that the final and most disturbing discovery was made. In a makeshift snow den, dug desperately into the side of the ravine, lay the bodies of Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolovatov, and Nikolai Thibault-Brignol. They were better dressed than the others, a grim testament to their prolonged fight for survival. Analysis confirmed that these garments had been taken from the first 2 bodies discovered under the cedar tree. A piece of Krivonishenko's sweater was found on Dubinina. Zolotaryov was wearing Doroshenko's trousers. It was a heart-wrenching scene suggesting a desperate final attempt to huddle together for warmth as their companions succumbed to the cold, but the state of their bodies would soon eclipse all other mysteries. The autopsies, conducted by Dr. Boris Vozrojdeny, revealed catastrophic and inexplicable injuries. Thibault-Brignol had suffered a severe, multifaceted skull fracture. Dubinina and Zolotaryov both had massive chest trauma, with numerous ribs fractured on both sides. Dr. Vozrojdeny stated that the force required to inflict such damage was immense, comparable to the impact of a high-speed car crash or a shock wave from an explosion. Yet, perplexingly, there were almost no external signs of trauma on their bodies. No significant bruising, no cuts, no soft tissue damage that would correspond with such devastating internal injuries. It was as if they had been crushed by an immense, invisible pressure. The most gruesome and baffling discovery was with Lyudmila Dubinina. Her tongue, hyoid bone, and parts of her mouth floor were missing. And to deepen the enigma, forensic tests on some of the clothing, particularly a sweater worn by Dubinina and trousers on Kolovatov, tested positive for significant levels of beta particle radioactive contamination. The official investigation, which had been piecing together this confounding puzzle, concluded abruptly in late May 1959. The files were classified and sealed away from the public and the grieving families. The final report was brief and famously vague, offering no concrete answers. Faced with a series of contradictions they could not resolve, investigators closed the case, blaming the deaths on an unknown compelling force. This unsatisfying verdict left a vacuum of information that has since been filled with decades of speculation. The verdict couldn't connect the disparate and bizarre threads of evidence, The tent slashed from the inside, the scattered bodies in various states of undress, the strange and fatal injuries without external signs, and the inexplicable traces of radioactivity. Years later, in the 1990s, the lead investigator, Lev Ivanov, broke his silence. He revealed that he and his superiors were baffled by the case, and that regional officials had ordered him to close the investigation and classify the findings. He suggested the group had encountered something extraordinary, pointing to multiple reports from other witnesses, including meteorologists and other hiking groups, of strange glowing spheres in the sky over the northern Urals during that period. He personally believed these phenomena were connected to the hikers' deaths. In the search for a rational explanation, the most widely accepted conventional theory is a slab avalanche. Proponents suggest a small, delayed avalanche struck the tent, causing the initial injuries to those inside and forcing a panicked emergency exit. This could explain the tent cut from within and the retreat to the forest. But this avalanche theory has serious problems. The search party found no evidence of an avalanche. The tent was on a gentle slope of less than 30 degrees, not typically prone to avalanches. Furthermore, the hikers' own tracks were preserved, which would have been obliterated by a significant snowslide. Another natural theory points to a rare combination of katabatic winds and infrasound. Katabatic winds are powerful, gravity-driven winds that carry high-density air down a slope. It's hypothesized that as these winds moved over the unique topography of Kholat Syakhl, they could have generated low-frequency infrasound, sound below the range of human hearing. Exposure to infrasound can reportedly induce feelings of nausea, breathlessness, and intense, irrational panic. This could explain why the experienced hikers suddenly fled their tent in terror, but it doesn't explain the massive internal injuries or the radioactivity. This leads to more sinister theories, pointing to secret military activity in a region known for such operations during the Cold War. Could the hikers have accidentally stumbled upon a test of a concussive or radiological weapon, like a parachute mine? Such a weapon, detonating in the air, could produce a powerful shockwave capable of inflicting the observed internal injuries without leaving shrapnel or a crater. This theory could also potentially explain the traces of radiation found on the clothing and the subsequent government secrecy and alleged cover-up. However, no records of such tests in that specific area have ever been declassified, and no military debris was ever found. Finally, there are the fringe theories, born from the lack of a satisfying official explanation. Some speculate an attack by an unknown creature, like the region's mythological Menk, a Siberian version of the Yeti. Others, echoing Lev Ivanov's suspicions, point to an encounter with extraterrestrials. While these ideas capture the imagination, they remain firmly in the realm of speculation, lacking any physical evidence to support them. Each theory attempts to explain a piece of the puzzle, but none can account for all the strange and contradictory facts of the case. More than 60 years after the incident, the story of the 9 hikers continues to captivate and haunt the public imagination. The story has been the subject of countless books, documentaries, films, podcasts, each attempting to piece together the puzzle. The case contains the perfect ingredients for a modern myth. It has compelling, heroic characters, a dramatic and hostile setting, and a collection of forensic evidence so baffling that it defies easy explanation. The mountains of the northern Urals continue to keep their secrets. The story serves as a chilling and profound reminder of the unpredictable forces that govern our world, whether they are forces of nature, human action, or something beyond our current comprehension. The 9 young explorers who set out in 1959 in search of adventure found instead a fate that would make them immortal in the annals of unsolved mysteries. The final truth of what happened on that frozen slope may never be known, a ghostly campfire tale rooted in terrifying fact, with a silent, slashed tent and a question that echoes in the wind.